The beeping was steady, patient, unimpressed by anything that had brought Petra Kincaid to this room. She opened her eyes to the pale ceiling of Northwestern Memorial's trauma ICU, and for 3 seconds the world was just light and sound, and the dull ache of a body that had been hit by something heavier than itself. Then Victor Strand stepped into her line of sight. He wasn't holding flowers, he was holding a folder. "Good," he said. "The way a man says good when a delayed package finally arrives. You're awake." Petra's mouth was dry. Her left shoulder was wrapped tight, and her ribs pulled when she breathed. 2 days, the nurses would tell her later. She'd been unconscious for 2 days. But Victor wasn't looking at her like a man who had waited 2 days with his heart in his throat. He was looking at her the way he looked at contractors who ran behind schedule. "I need you to sign something," he said. She blinked. "Victor." "The deal closes Friday." He set the folder on the rolling tray beside her bed with a soft, decisive thud. "The Kincaid Group transfer. Chen Capital has been patient, but Marlowe says we're out of extensions." Petra stared at him, her ribs pulled again when she exhaled. "I'm in the ICU." "I know where you are." He uncapped his pen. "The accident was unfortunate, but the timeline didn't move. I need your signature on the transfer authorization and the LLC reassignment." Marlowe simplified the packet. 40 minutes, tops. There was a knock, soft but firm, and a nurse appeared in the doorway. She was somewhere in her 50s, with the kind of calm that came from 30 years of watching people at their worst. Her name tag read C. Elms. "Mr. Strand," she said, "your wife came out of trauma 43 hours ago. Her vitals are still being monitored. Whatever you're discussing needs to wait." Victor looked at Nurse Elms the way he looked at parking attendants. "This will take 10 minutes. "No," she said, with the weight of someone who had moved far larger men out of far smaller rooms. "It won't." He held her gaze for a beat. Then he clicked his pen closed, took the folder, and stepped into the hallway with a tight exhale. Through the glass panel on the door, Petra watched him pull out his phone immediately. Nurse Elms checked the IV line without a word. "He's been here the whole time?" Petra asked. The nurse's pause was 1 beat too long. "He came in this morning," she said. 2 days in the hospital, in that morning. Petra looked at the ceiling and breathed through the ache in her ribs. She had been married to Victor Strand for 4 years. She had defended him to her cousins at Thanksgiving, defended him to old college friends who said he talked over her, defended him to herself in the dark of rooms she'd grown up in the house her parents left her. She thought she knew who he was. She was beginning to think she had confused knowing someone with choosing not to look. The second person to enter her room that afternoon was a woman Petra had not seen in over a year. Cornelia Hatch was 61, and she dressed like a federal judge who had never once doubted herself. Charcoal coat, ivory blouse, a briefcase she had carried since the 90s. She had been the Kincaid family's attorney since before Petra was born, had sat in the front row at both her parents' funerals, had managed the estate paperwork with a steadiness that never once faltered. She walked in without knocking, glanced once at the monitors, and sat down. "I heard what happened on the 90s," she said. "I should have come sooner." "He was here with transfer documents," Petra said. She wasn't surprised by Cornelia's presence. Somewhere at the bottom of whatever post-accident fog still clouded her thinking, she had been waiting for someone like Cornelia to appear. Her mother used to say that when the world tested you, you'd find out who had been paying attention. "I know," Cornelia said. "I saw the folder in his hand when I passed him in the hall. The Kincaid Group transfer, he says Chen Capital. Chen Capital has been negotiating with Victor for 7 months, Cornelia said calmly. "I've been watching it." Petra frowned. "You knew?" "I knew he was making overtures. I didn't know he'd moved to execution stage until 2 days ago, which is when I got in the car." She placed a document on the tray where Victor's folder had been. It was older, the paper slightly yellowed at the edges. But the seal at the top was sharp and clean, the Kincaid Family Trust, established 1987. "Your parents created this trust the year your father acquired the 4th property," Cornelia said. "They added to it every time the portfolio grew. When they passed, the trust transferred to you. All 11 properties, the buildings, the operating rights, the LLC structures underneath them, and the land." She looked at Petra steadily. Victor's name has never appeared on a single document in this file. Not once. The room was quiet except for the steady beeping. He doesn't own them, Petra said. He has never owned them. He has a spousal presumption of access to certain marital assets. But these are not marital assets. They predate your marriage. They're held in an irrevocable trust that specifically excludes spousal transfer without trustee authorization. Cornelia paused. You are the trustee. He's been negotiating to sell something that was never his to sell. Yes. Petra pressed her palm flat against the mattress and breathed. And if I had signed today? The transfer would have been legally void. But it would have created 6 months of litigation and given Chen capital grounds to pull out of any future deal, which would have cost you considerably. Victor likely knew that. The goal wasn't to steal the properties outright. The goal was to push you into a transfer under duress that would have taken years to unwind. Petra stared at the trust document. Her mother's signature was at the bottom. Her father's beside it. Two people who had spent their lives building something careful and lasting, who had apparently also spent part of those lives building protection for a daughter they somehow knew would one day need it. She didn't cry. She was too tired to cry, and something else was happening instead. Something quieter and more dangerous, a clarity that had been trying to reach her for years, finally breaking the surface. Victor came back 20 minutes later. He pushed the door open without knocking and stopped when he saw Cornelia. The change in his face was immediate and surgical. The irritation compressed, flattened, covered by the boardroom expression he had spent 2 decades perfecting. Cornelia. He said her name the way people say names when they're buying time. Victor, she said his the way people say names when they don't need any. He looked at Petra. I didn't realize you'd called anyone. She didn't, Cornelia said. I came on my own. Well, he set the folder back on the tray. Whatever family history Cornelia wants to walk you through can wait until after Friday. Right now You need to hear this first, Petra said. He turned. She was sitting up straighter than she had been. Despite the ribs, despite the shoulder, despite the 43 hours she'd spent unconscious on a trauma table. The Kincaid group doesn't belong to you, she said. It never did. Victor's expression didn't crack, not immediately, but something shifted behind his eyes, the smallest recalculation. Petra, you're on pain medication. The trust was established in 1987. All 11 properties placed in an irrevocable trust that excludes spousal transfer. Your name is not on a single document in the file. She looked at him clearly, the way she hadn't in years, the way she'd stopped doing sometime around year 2 when it was easier not to. You've been negotiating to sell assets you don't own. The silence lasted 4 seconds. Then Victor laughed, a short, performative exhale, the laugh of a man who had laughed his way out of difficult rooms before. That's not, Cornelia. Wherever you found those documents, they're outdated. We restructured. Show me the restructuring paperwork, Cornelia said. He stopped laughing. Victor, show me the document where Petra authorized a transfer of trust assets into marital property. Her tone was the same as it had been since she walked in, even, unhurried, absolutely immovable. I'll wait. He looked at Petra, then at Cornelia, then at the folder in his hand, which now contained documents that described him as the owner of something he was not. This isn't the time for this, he said. It really is, Petra said. He left. Not to give up, she knew him well enough to understand that, but to make calls. Through the glass panel she watched him pace the hallway, phone pressed hard to his ear, the composed CEO posture slowly developing fractures the way ice does before it goes. Nurse Elms brought Petra water and didn't say anything. There was kindness in the not saying. My mother used to do that, Petra said quietly, holding the cup. Walk into rooms where things were about to fall apart and just be steady. Like if she was calm enough, the situation would get the message. The nurse smiled. Sounds like a smart woman. She was, Petra exhaled. She also apparently spent years making sure I'd have a floor to stand on if someone tried to pull the rug out. She paused. I wish I'd known. Maybe she knew you'd know when you needed to. Cornelia was in the corner on her own phone, speaking in the measured tones of someone managing a process already in motion. Petra caught pieces of it, The word board, the word Chen, the phrase cease and desist. Then a different knock on the door. A hospital security officer, polite but direct. There had been an incident at the main entrance. A young woman, identified as Lena Driscoll, had arrived insisting on seeing Victor. She had become agitated when told he was unavailable and had attempted to access the ICU floor without authorization. Security had contained her on the ground level. She was not permitted to return to this floor. Petra looked at Cornelia. Cornelia looked at Petra. "I'd like a copy of the visitor log for the last 48 hours, Cornelia told the officer. After he left, the room was quiet. "She was here yesterday too," Petra said. "It wasn't a question." Cornelia didn't insult her by denying it. Petra closed her eyes. She had seen the way Victor texted sometimes, with a focus and a privacy that had nothing to do with work. She had told herself it was work. She had chosen for a long time to tell herself a lot of things. "How long?" she asked. "I don't have that information." "But you suspected?" Cornelia was quiet for a moment. "Your mother asked me years ago to watch out for you. She didn't specify what for. She didn't have to." Petra's throat tightened. She pressed her hand to her sternum, above the bandaging, where the ache was less physical than structural. The feeling of something that had been bearing weight it was never designed for, finally setting it down. The call came at 6:47 p.m. Victor took it in the hallway, but the ICU corridor had thin walls, and the glass panel muffled nothing. She could see him clearly, the moment his body changed, shoulders pulling inward the way expensive suits aren't designed to accommodate. 4 minutes later, he came back into the room. His face was still controlled, but the control was costing him something now. "The board has initiated a review," he said. "Someone flagged the purchase agreement with Chen Capital." "Because it lists you as the owner of record," Cornelia said from the corner. This was a misunderstanding, a paperwork. "Misrepresenting ownership in a commercial real estate transaction is not a paperwork error," Cornelia said. "It's fraud." Cornelia. Victor. Petra spoke quietly, and he went still. It surprised him. She could tell. She had been quiet for so long in their marriage that her stillness registered differently now, not as retreat, as the moment before something irrevocable. "I'm not signing anything. Not today, not Friday, not at any point in a process you designed without my knowledge." She looked at him clearly. "The Kincaid Group is mine. It was my parents'. You knew I managed that portfolio. You married me knowing those properties existed. And instead of being a partner, you spent 7 months trying to sell what you'd decided was already yours." Victor opened his mouth. "Don't," she said. He closed it. She exhaled slowly. "I think you should call your own attorney." He was still in the hallway when the second set of calls came. This time from Strand Development Group's offices on the 41st floor. The board had moved faster than he expected. Executive suspension, pending review. The Chen Capital deal flagged to federal regulators. A compliance team was being dispatched. Cornelia delivered all of this in the matter-of-fact tone of someone reading weather conditions. Then she told Petra about Lena Driscoll. Security had finally persuaded her to wait in the lobby consultation room rather than the entrance. In the course of that conversation, Lena had told the security officer, twice, that she needed to speak with Victor urgently. She had also mentioned that she was 8 weeks pregnant and that Victor had promised to handle everything once the Kincaid deal closed. Cornelia told Petra this herself carefully, watching her face. Petra heard it. She sat with it. She noticed that it didn't break her. Not because she wasn't hurting, but because whatever had been carrying the weight of this marriage had already set it down, quietly, while she was looking at her mother's signature on a document from 1987. "She's in trouble too," Petra said finally. "He used her the same way he used everyone." "She made choices," Cornelia said. "She did. So did I, for 4 years." Petra looked at her hands. "I'm done making them." Victor was escorted off the floor by security at 8:15 p.m., following a confrontation with the compliance attorney who had arrived from the board offices. He came to Petra's door first, trying one final time. She could see the desperation in his posture through the glass, the old charm resurfacing the way it did when he needed something. She turned her face toward the window. Nurse Elms watched the door until he was gone. 3 days later, Petra was discharged. Cornelia had arranged for the car and, with characteristic efficiency, had arranged considerably more than that. Warren Aldous, a probate and estate attorney who had worked alongside Cornelia on the Kincaid Trust for over a decade, was waiting at the entrance with updated documentation confirming Petra's status as sole trustee and beneficial owner of all 11 properties. The SEC referral was proceeding. Victor's attorney had made a preliminary call proposing a quiet settlement. Cornelia had proposed something considerably less quiet. Lena Driscoll had given a voluntary statement to the compliance team. She was no longer employed by Strand Development Group. Victor had been formally suspended. Charges were pending. Petra heard all of it in the car. She listened, asked the right questions, made the decisions that needed making. Then she looked out the window at the city going past in late afternoon light. The Kincaid Lake House was a 2-hour drive outside Chicago. Her parents had built it before the hotels, before the portfolio, before anything that could be called a legacy. Just a house near water, because her father said the best thinking happened near water. Petra hadn't been there in 3 years. She went there now. The house was cold and still when she walked in, the particular silence of a place that had been waiting. Petra moved through it slowly, her hand trailing the back of the reading chair where her father used to sit, the kitchen counter where her mother made coffee without fail every morning. The things that outlasted people. Warren met her in the study. He was holding an envelope. "Your father left this," he said, "with instructions that it be given to you when the estate cleared its final review. That review concluded last month. I was going to come in the spring." He looked at her steadily. "Given everything, I thought sooner was better." The envelope was cream-colored, thick, with her name in her father's handwriting. Petra, the straight-backed letters she had tried to copy as a child and never quite managed. She sat in his reading chair and opened it. "There is something we never told you," her father had written. "Not because we didn't trust you, but because we wanted you to find out when you were ready to use it." She read the letter slowly. Then she read the document folded inside it. The Kincaid Hotel Group was built on land her grandfather had assembled over 30 years. Raw parcels the family had held long before the buildings existed. When her parents placed the properties in trust, they had placed the buildings and the operating entities, but the land beneath all 11 hotels, the actual ground, had been placed in a separate, older trust decades prior. That trust had passed to Petra directly upon her grandfather's death, before her marriage, before any of the events that had brought her to this chair. Victor had been trying to sell buildings he didn't own, built on land that had belonged to Petra's family for 60 years, that would belong to her family for 60 more. She folded the letter. She held it in her hands for a long moment, in the quiet of her father's study, in the house near water where the best thinking happened. Then she looked out the window at the last light sitting on the lake, and for the first time in 4 years, in longer than that, maybe, she felt the particular stillness of a person who knows exactly where they stand. She had nothing to rebuild. Everything was already hers. She just had to be willing to hold it.